Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Hey, welcome to Target Market Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman. I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you enjoy this podcast, do me a favor. Leave us a 5-star rating and review so other folks can get the same great content that you're getting and they can find the show. All right. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today we're going to be talking to a really good friend of mine, Mr. John Fortes. But before we bring him on, I want to let you know that we have a sample deal package available for download on our website. Now, if you've been interested in multifamily investing, whether it's putting your own deal together or investing passively, and you want to see what a deal package looks like, go to kasmancapital.com/sample deal, and you'll be able to download our sample deal package there. Now, that's kasmancapital.com/sample deal. You'll also join our mailing list, and you'll get a chance to check out some of our exclusive investment opportunities if you qualify. Again, that's kasmancapital.com/sample deal. Now, John Fortes formed Community First Investment Group with his two partners with a portfolio of 103 units valued at over $5.2 million spread out between two assets. Now, John's team focuses on value-add projects in B and C class neighborhoods. With a desire to give back and through the many conversations with passive investors he's had, he has now created the Passive Investor Show. So let's bring on to the show Mr. John Fortes.
What's going on, John? Excited to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, John. Good to have you on the show. Really excited to talk to you today. I want to give you 30 seconds to kind of expand a little bit on the short bio that I read.
Yeah, so me and my partners, when we first came into the game, we partnered with other people and JV'd on our first 62 units. That one's probably my favorite asset to talk about because it is a dead asset and it's not producing anything, but it has a ton of life lessons in this business. So from there,
Okay.
a few months later, we co-syndicated a 41 unit. And have been looking since for other opportunities. But since then, I've connected with tons of passive investors that want to participate in future opportunities. And so I kept having the same conversations over and over again and created the Passive Investor Show. And that's how it started.
No, I love it, man. I love it. Well, listen, let's jump into that. First of all, you talked about a dead asset and that being your favorite thing. I absolutely need you to elaborate. One, when you say dead asset, what exactly does that mean? And kind of talk to us about what happened.
That means it's no tenants in it. It's not generating
62 units, no tenants.
No tenants. It's not generating any profits. We took it down with a bridge loan that we're starting literally on the process of extending that loan for another 6 months. Building one, it's what happens when you deal with contractors that don't have the capacity to take down and to basically move the work as fast as you want. Issues with certain things with inspections. It's still a good product. It's still going to cash flow very nicely. It's the way we took it over as well. We didn't communicate with the tenants in the other buildings when we emptied out one building. That's a life lesson right there. So I would recommend if you're going to do a heavy lift for this one, this was like 60-70% occupancy going in. We didn't communicate to building 2 and 3 to say, hey, when building 1 is up and running, we want you guys to have first crack at that, stay put. And everybody being on monthly
month-to-month leases.
Yeah, month-to-month leases. It was just a situation where tenants talk, building 1 is out. The only letter we sent to everybody was basically, hey, new management. And then the next letter was sent to building 1 saying, hey, you have 2 months and we need these emptied. Since they were all leased month to month and the remaining of the units of the other 2 buildings were month to month, everybody just talks, tenants talk. And the next thing you know, it's like almost like a mass exodus. So that's what happened there.
So let's dive into that. I think there sounds like there's a lot of lessons there and a lot of information we can glean and just really take to heart as far as maybe some of the mistakes that were made there, the challenges, some things that you could have done differently. First of all, you said there are three buildings, 62 units. You started by kind of emptying out the first building. The plan was to to renovate the first building. Once that building was ready, you would give first crack in buildings 2 and 3 to move residents in there. And I assume you would have continued to renovate buildings 2 and 3 in the same force pathway, right?
Absolutely. And that's basically was the plan. But the
Okay.
fact that we didn't communicate
Yep.
to the tenants to
Yep.
give them that option instead of, "Oh, screw it, I'm just gonna go and look for something
Yep.
else," you know. So
So
communicating is huge.
why building one? Did you try to consolidate anyone from building one and move them to building 2 or 3, or did you just kick everybody in building one out?
Well, we gave them options to work with the property management team to help them look for a new place. The reason why is building one had the most single one bedrooms, and to plow through the building faster, we wanted to pick the building with the most amount of one bedrooms to get that up and running. So if we kept it as is, where the other two buildings, basically 2 and 3, were just fine, and we were at the break even point where we were just paying for the rehab. Now we're paying for everything. Like we've had two
Yeah.
capital calls.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, we did not move tenants from building 1 to 2 or 3, which basically is another life lesson that we should have done or practiced. So you
Yeah.
don't know what you don't know until you get into the situation, because you just
Yeah.
think, all right, let me empty out one, and then what's the smartest way to do this? And you don't really put that in with everybody coming in, where this was our big, like our each member was their first deal. You don't think of that as
Yeah.
an option. You just think that they're going to leave your property anyways, instead of give them the option to go to, hey, there's units here in building 2 and 3, let's try
Yeah.
to keep that float and keep it going with a break even.
Yeah, so let's break this down for someone who may be listening to this for the first time and getting a little scared on things that could go wrong. So, a couple of things here, right? You bought a distressed asset. Distressed
Yes.
is basically less than 85% occupied. So, it sounds like this was more the 60 to 70% occupancy space. So, you're probably struggling to break even cash flow wise, even if you kept all of those tenants there. Is that fair to say?
No, we were breaking even with the other
You were
two
breaking even.
buildings. We were
Okay.
breaking even with the other two buildings, and those weren't even fully um, uh, occupied, right? So what I mean by that is there were like probably like 3 or 4 vacancies in that building and those two buildings, and we were still breaking even. So to empty out building one and still break even, that was the goal, to keep it at that.
Yep.
But when everybody just flees the scene,
Yep.
it's hard to do that. And what happened was the partners had to go through 3 capital calls. We've done three
Yeah.
capital calls, and yeah, that's what it takes to get that there. But
To get it done.
here's where we are now, right? So you asked me if I would I do this again? Absolutely. I would do it. I would look for another asset right now to go do this again, because now I know so much more.
Yep.
I know exactly what to do, what to not do, how to communicate, and also you would see better returns too. So like you said, it's a distressed property,
Yep.
but the potential and opportunity is so much worth the risk.
Yep. So I'll recap maybe some things, some key lessons that I'm hearing from your story, and then I know you've got some other great projects that are working better, so we'll talk about those as well. But one, you bought a distressed asset, which inherently has more risk because you have less tenants there, so you kind of need to go through what we call a lease up period, where you're trying to fill the building up. And in your case, you wanted to renovate the property really before going through that lease up, so there was going to be a period where cash flow is a little bit tight, and removing the folks who are in that first building. You obviously empty that out, so you now have less tenants paying rent, but in addition you have the whispers for the other two buildings to say, hey, what's going to happen to me? Well, I'm not going to wait to find out. I'm going to go find a new place now. So you have all these other residents that move out, so communicating clearly to those additional residents what the plan was may have helped you significantly in that case to retain those residents. And then the last thing was, you had to make three capital calls. Part of what happened there is just simply not being funded properly to have enough money in reserves up front to manage kind of these kind of issues. So I would say the key lessons are, first and foremost, make sure that you have clear communication, not just with your team internally, your project property manager, but with the residents. These are people who've lived in these properties. These are their homes, and they're concerned, just like anyone else would be concerned if you're going to get kicked out, if your rent's going to increase, if you're going to be displaced. So you need to clearly communicate at least what the implications are for them. If you're not planning on kicking them out, you should let them know that. If you are planning on kicking them out, as soon as you feasibly can tell them that, you should let them know that. And then sometimes, you may select, hey, we're just going to take people who either were late paying rents or no longer meet our qualifications or whatever the case may be, but clearly communicate that. And then obviously the last piece is being properly capitalized up front so you don't have to come back to investors and say, hey, we need more money. I think it's going to be a much easier conversation to say, hey, we're going to raise more money than we need just in case we get into a bind or cash flow gets tight. And as we implement our business plan, we want to have that flexibility versus, if you're using cash flow or you're tight with kind of the reserves you raise, and then you get into a situation, you need more money, you got to go back. Now investors are a little, they're a little less confident. I mean, it's just not as exciting. And this happens to a lot of people. I don't want people to think that this is a one-off thing. We had a deal where we kind of ran into some similar challenges. Some things are completely out of our control, where a contractor literally took our money and didn't pay the subs. And, what do we do? The sub's going to put a lien on the property. We don't pay him. I'm going after the guy with some legal proceedings. But obviously that put us in a bind, and we had to invest way more money into that deal than we wanted to. So those kind of things happen. But a lot of great lessons there, especially for newer syndicators who just hear kind of the sexy side of things. You buy it, you raise the money, you hire a property manager, and then profit, right? There's a hell of a lot more that goes on into the operational side with the business plan and protecting yourself with a strong business plan that's conservative and gives you, a lot of flexibility in protecting your investors as well. So lots of great tips there, John. Let's move on to the second deal. We talked about 62. You also acquired, I believe, a 41 unit. Talk to me a little bit more about that deal.
The boring one, right? So it's exactly what you just said.
Those are the ones we like. We love boring.
Yeah, we love those. We love those.
I mean, they don't make for great podcast episodes as much as the bad ones, but I'm sure your investors like the boring distributions better.
So the same partner that found the 62 found this one and was told by Lendon that he would have to syndicate. And I am just basically, I consume everything syndication. I love it. I love the model. I love talking to people about their different structures. I believe when you were in Boston, man, we talked about how you structure in deals and all of that. We covered so much at that conference out here. But for instance, like he came to us and said, look, I need some risk capital, the earnest, and I need someone that can drive the syndication. So I knew all the aspects and avenues about it. So we need to talk to this lawyer, and go through all those pieces. And we syndicated the deal. So the capital was basically raised prior to the documents being drawn up because of our connections and already our contacts and such. So that process was pretty easy. Going through the syndication process with the attorneys and everything else, that was kind of cool just to experience all of that for the first time. So that's basically when we close. I mean, right now it's just a 9% cash on cash return, and it's just doing exactly what it's doing. And we're renovating basically units as they turn over. So we're giving them the option from when the leases expire. We're saying, hey, here's the new rent. Since they're all staggered out anyways at a good pace for us to be able to do this. So we can say to the tenant that their lease expires, saying, hey, here's the market rate rent. If you're going to pay that, that's great. We're not saying it just like this, but like giving them the renewal rate at market. And if they lease up, that's great. If not, we go ahead and renovate the units and then collect the lease up, the market rate rent that we're asking for. So basically that's the way we're tackling that one. And it's literally, we've renovated a few units and it's just been going smooth, man. So it's nothing to really brag about, talk about. It's everything that you actually hear on other podcasts. So
But that's the key though. But I think the point is that there's a reason that you follow a certain protocol and the way things work. And unfortunately, it's because a lot of people have made mistakes and we learn from our mistakes. And I think that's the growth that we see in talking to you is that first deal to the second deal. One of the big things, and I don't know if everyone's picked up on this, is your model is very different in how you manage the renovations. On this deal, the second one we're talking about, you focused on unit turns. So you didn't come in, try to clear house and start renovating. You said, listen, when leases expire, we're going to give them an option. Hey, here's what the market rent is. They either pay it, or if they decide not to and they leave, when they leave, we'll renovate that unit. We'll get the new market rent or maybe even a little bit above that since it's a renovated unit. And that's what we will do. But we're not going to inflate the vacancy to expedite our plans. We could turn all these units and be done in a couple months. We're going to string this out and deliver strong cash flow returns and kind of manage the renovations as they come up, which is a safer schedule. It reduces some of the risk and makes it easy. So no, that sounds great. We don't have to go much deeper in that, but I do want to talk a little bit more about the comparison between the two deals, if that's okay with you, John.
yeah, that's awesome. One thing that I would just add is, for instance, like if there are 15 lease renewals, we do stagger them. So some of them will be 3 months, some of them will be 6 months, some will be 9 months, some will be for a year. It depends on where we want to be with our occupancy rate, right? So and these renovations of the project. So like you said, keeping them going and keeping the cash flow there. On this one, there's a great reserves account there just sitting there for us to turn these units, and we got cash flow on top of that, and we're hitting everything that we're checking all the boxes from day one. So this one's been great. So yeah, the differences, if you want to jump into that, let's jump into it.
Yeah, well, one, I love the thing you said about the renewals, right? So it's not just if you've got 15 coming up at one time. I mean, that's a lot for a 41 unit building, right? So instead of trying to do 15, where now you're going to have the same issue, the next year, trying to stagger
Mhm.
them out. So if you can get people on a 3 month renewal, a 6 month renewal, 9 month. So I think the takeaway there is you don't have to just do a 1 year renewal. You can get creative and say, hey, I'll do a 3 month renewal or 6 month renewal. And then at that moment, maybe you have new product that's available and you can move someone into a new unit or something like that. But you can find a way to get creative. But the point is to reduce risk, reduce the amount of vacancies you face at one time, because what you don't want to have happen is have 10 of those units become vacant because 10 people decided to move out, and now you're renovating these units and you have another, again, a cash flow issue. But the other piece that I didn't ask you on the first deal, if it was 60 to 70% occupied, why did you start by emptying that first building versus just doing the units that were already vacant?
Well, we had our break even point, and it made sense for us at the time because there's other things that factored into that. So the decks on it weren't up to code. So by the city, we needed to get those up to code and inspected. So the city was really on us about that. And it's not just for that building, it's for all the buildings. So eventually we would have had to clear it out, the buildings, because the
Yeah,
decks, because I mean, imagine having a unit on the second floor and you don't have no deck to walk out on. You forget one morning, you open up, that would be on us. So
yeah.
I mean, just to be safe, we said, all right, we got to do these decks. So building one made the most sense for us to tackle at the time. And that's a great question. So I've never been asked that, but yeah, that's the answer for that one.
But you know what? It's a great answer. It's funny. I smiled as you started explaining about the decks because it's the small building I was mentioning. It's the same issue we faced because well, we had two issues. One, we had a pool of residents that simply were not a part of our future. We knew from the jump. We had talked to the police. We had gotten all of our due diligence. We identified which tenants in particular we didn't want to be a part of it going forward. But ultimately, the city, we had a similar deck issue where they want us to fix up some of the decks. And the same conversation we had with our team was to say, if we tear some decks off, and I mean, you can board up the back door, but I mean, that's a bad experience. I mean, no one wants to
Yeah.
live where your back door is boarded up,
It's a
right?
fire hazard too.
Yeah, it's a fire hazard if you don't have the two escapes. So we made a similar decision to say, hey, let's take the occupancy down really low, to kind of the bare bones, and do the decks, do the renovations and fill them up. So I completely understand the logic now of, hey, we've got to take care of this thing with the city as well as doing this. So that's very helpful.
And
Um,
then you got to get the certificate of occupancy after you renovate the units too.
oh yeah, of
So you
course,
got to
of
get
course.
the
Dealing with the
inspection on
city.
the deck too. So
Yep,
the city wants
yep.
everything done.
Yep, absolutely. So, and then going back to kind of the capital that you used and having reserves, having the amount, what's the difference between the approach on the 41 unit and kind of what you did initially with that 62?
So the 62 is a JV. So all of our partners are truly invested in the deal, are active. So the difference with that one is the passive investors. I would never put my passive investors in that first deal unless had a ton of reserves. And put it this way, I can always give capital back if I didn't need it. And that's my mindset on that. So for instance, I would raise an X amount of capital for the capex just to have there in the reserves, whether I touch it or not. Because if I give it back, either way, it's just like, all right, here's a return on some of your investment
Hmm.
by giving it back. So that's the difference on those ones. On a really distressed one, I'm raising way more in reserves than I am on a cash flow and asset with just a light value add that I'm just going to turn units as tenants leave. So that's the difference on that one.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And again, just it's interesting because the deal I just mentioned, we had the same thing. It was a JV, so we didn't raise a crazy amount of capital reserves. We actually had the lender; they were adamant about providing the renovation budget.
Yep,
We
same here.
fought them on it, and we're like, "No, we'll do it ourselves." I was like, "No, please send the budget to us. We want to do it." I'm like, no, we'll use our cash, and they pushed harder than I was anticipating, so we ended up doing that route. So when we did have to come back, it was we fronted the bulk of it, and then we did get to the point where we had to go to our JV partner and say, look, we've put in X amount, man. We just we could use a little bit more to
Yeah.
kind of get this thing stabilized, and then obviously once we stabilize, we'll refi and kind of pay everybody back out.
It's
But
it's easier to get a it's easier to do a capital call with JV partners than it is for a syndicated deal because of the
mhm,
fact that the syndicated deal, everybody's expecting you to be basically perfect with every step on that one. It's passive investors. They're like, hey, you were supposed to have this done and do it this way. What happened? Where's the fault? You got to do a lot of explaining to do to passive investors in a syndicated deal than you would normally on a JV because of the fact that every meeting you're having, everybody's participant and everybody's there in regards to the project. So it's not like anyone's truly passive in that deal. So if they miss a meeting, they can go back and watch the recording for the actual deal that's JV'd. And that's how we do it. And I know everybody does it differently, but on a syndicated deal, the general partners are basically controlling and handling everything. So passive investors are getting monthly newsletters, and whether there's some good news and bad news, that's fine. But to go back and do a capital call on top of that is probably the worst thing you can do with passive investors.
that's a great point. That's a great point, right? Because and just to illustrate that a little further, JVs, every joint it's a joint venture, right? So on a JV, each participant should be able to control how they make money in it. So they should have an
Yep.
active role. They should have a say so in what happens. So they're all kind of involved in what happens. And that was a similar thing with our situation, especially since we weren't local at the time. So we had a local partner, and their job was to make sure kind of the work was
Yep.
happening. And some of it wasn't happening to the way we were being communicated. So it's kind of the mix up, and it's kind of on all of us as JVs, and we got that fixed and straightened out, right?
Yep.
But to your point on a syndication deal, you have passive investors, and they're not involved. Their hands are up. They expect a return, and that's what your business. That's the extent of the business. So if you're not delivering on that, you've got some bigger issues. So it definitely makes sense if you are going to do a syndication, you absolutely want to be conservative. You want to raise more money than you actually need. You want to have proper reserves and operating capital. You want to, slow down your renovation schedule and mitigate your risk as much as possible, versus if it's doing a couple buddies, you guys can be more aggressive. You can take it down to the studs if you want to do that, or whatever it is you want to do. But when you're dealing with other people's money and they're not involved in the day-to-day decision making, you definitely want to be more conservative in that approach. So, John, speaking of work with other investors, you've been having a lot of investor conversations. Recently, you launched the Passive Investor podcast. Talk to me about this show. What is it about, and what sparked you to launch it in the first place?
Appreciate that. So what sparked me was I was having a lot of the same conversations over and over and over again. I said, you know what? This would be a good reason to basically have these conversations with everyone all at the same time. So I was, how I came up with the idea, I said, all right, people were like, John, you should come up with a podcast, literally asking me, but I was pushing against it. So I went out for a run one morning, about 8 miles, 6 miles, whatever I did that day. And during my run, I come up with probably my greatest, best ideas. My mind is clear. I'm just thinking, I'm in my thoughts, I'm in my stillness, I'm in everything. So I came home, I was like, I'm going to do it based off these conversations that I'm having. So I had to come up with how do I be different? How do I do it differently? How do I do this? And I'm still tweaking with the formatting, which I love because I can just do and test different things, but it's based on time. I have 2 days a week. Thursdays is quick hitters. I'm giving you a little nugget on something where it's anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes. I'm not trying to take up too much of your time. My interviews, I'm trying to focus on 15 to 25 minutes. Point is, I want you to be able to consume as much content as possible. So even if you go to my website, it is notes, not blogs. I don't want to get real lengthy in them. I want to give you bullet points and just little captions. Give you an idea to explain some sort of the ideas on what you might think on what's cash on cash return again versus IRR, internal rate of return, and just little bullet points on why what the difference is and why you would what's the best metric you're looking for in when you're investing or something like that. So what do you basically, how are you consuming your content? And I want to make it efficient, fast, and quick for you because, John, I know you've seen this. You go to someone's website and it's a blog and it tells you already before you read it how fast, how long it should take you to read it, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or whatever. So I took that and I said, I want my content to be efficient and fast. So how do I do that? Notes. I provide notes, not blogs. So that was just basically my spin on things. And I feel like the whole world is going towards how do I consume more content fast. So I wanted my podcast shorter than the average podcast. And I wanted my my I guess blogs, my notes to be something that you can consume in minutes and seconds, if even. So yeah.
No, I love it. I love it. I think that's very helpful too. I mean, as professionals, most of the people listening are busy trying to manage, home life and growing a business as an entrepreneur or a business owner or even an executive in a company. And, there's only so much time. So, I know some folks might be listening to this on 1.5 speed just to try to get through more episodes. We're all trying to find those shortcuts. So if you can do notes or things like that make it easier for folks to consume the content and get the information that they need, that makes a lot of sense. You talked about having a lot of investor conversations and the same kind of things coming up. What are some of those things that are very frequent in most of your investor conversations?
So basically, introducing myself, talking about my background, and then I want to learn more about them. So basically, I want to learn what they're focused on their returns. I want to learn about what kind of opportunities they're seeking. I want to learn about, is multifamily the right fit for you? I want to learn about what are your metrics that you're basing all of these off of? I want to know about what your risk tolerance is. So I'm basically packaging all these conversations up in podcasts. So yeah, I mean, there's plenty more, but it's like when I'm on a call with the investor or when I meet them face to face, when it sparks me, I put it down on a piece of paper and I say, all right, let me make an episode about this. And it's literally real life experience translated into a podcast. So even when I bring on a guest on the show, I don't want to talk about literally about your background, John. I already know what you're doing. My guests assume you're in multifamily and syndication. I want to know what you're doing that benefits the passive investors. How does what you do translate to how it benefits passive investors? How it literally can change their lives? How can they find you? How can they participate? How can they do what you're doing, or even be involved in what you're doing? Because we all know the podcast that can explain the heavy lifts, the syndication model, everything else. But how does a passive investor learn how to passively invest? And that's what I want to bring to the table.
No, I love it. So the Passive Investor Show, I know that's everywhere you listen to podcasts. So definitely advise our listeners to check that out. One thing I want to talk about, just kind of in the pivot from that, is, one of the things that you and I were talking about before we hit the record button is, when you're having investor conversations, part of what we want to do is we're always building kind of our investor database, right? We're trying to continue to educate more investors. We're looking to get more investors into our database. And podcasting is a great way to start to connect with other investors. It takes some work, certainly takes a commitment, but it is a way for you to demonstrate your expertise and to answer questions that they need. And some folks get into it for the wrong reasons, but I love what you said, because it's very clear that what you're trying to do is add value to the listener and help educate them on what they should be looking for, the questions they should ask, and really learning how to be a passive investor, how to find deals, what to look for in an operator or a sponsor, and just how to move forward as a passive investor. So since you've been doing this show, what is the biggest surprise that you've seen as a podcaster and jumping into the space?
Oh, it's people reach out to me on it's weird if I compare it to how people reached out to me previously. It's apples to oranges. So what I mean by that is I would have a lot of conversations where a lot of people want to come on the general partnership side. So it's almost like I was looked at as just how basically a lot of investors want to do the general partnership side. And I was having a lot of conversations where people wanted to be on that general partnership side. The difference now is I'm having a lot of conversations with people that just want to passively invest strictly on the passive investor side. And if they mention to me the fact that they want to be on the GP side, there's a way for them to get there. And I can actually explain that process to them easily. By a lot of people that began on the GP side, the general partnership side, came from passive investing. You got to get there some way. A lot of people just don't jump in the boat and start rowing. Some do, but some of them literally, go to a process where they're taught how to row, how do you keep the stream, the paddles evenly on both arms. Maybe you got to work out or something. So you got to get there some way, right? So what I mean by that is invest passively first, learn what they're doing, learn the business model, and then find a way to use your expertise of what you learned to get on that general partnership side. It's a process. It's like going to the NBA, you got to go to college to get there, right? It's a process. So I'm not trying to say that it's the big leagues, but it is a different beast. When you syndicate, it is a different beast because there's a lot of things you have to keep in line to get to closing. And you got to make sure the pieces to the puzzle all come together at the right time. And when people come into the business, this is what I noticed is they think it's really an easy stream and can get done really fast. And it's really, really difficult if you don't have a sense of organization and time and a great team that you could work with. So coming in on GP side, you better make sure your pieces to that puzzle. And what I mean by everybody on that team really knows what they're doing and can get the job done. Because if you're new to the space, it's really hard to be able to drop the ball because it's a juggling act. And if you're not a good juggler, something's bound to fall.
Well, I love what you talked about as far as how to get in. And then to your point, there are a lot of moving pieces. So you definitely want to make sure you're the right team members. But I want to reiterate it because it's something I tell a lot of folks as well. If you want to get into multifamily syndication, the easiest thing to do is to become a limited partner, to be a passive investor in a deal, gain some experience, gain some credibility, learn more about the steps to process and what it is that you can actually do to provide value as a general partner. Then you can leverage that experience to become a general partner. And then from there, if you want to ultimately do your own deals as a lead sponsor or operator, you can do that. But it's going to be much easier. And think about having the confidence and also the credibility if you start off as a passive investor. If you're talking to people, you can talk to them about your experience as a passive investor. And then guess what? If you're looking to get them to be passive investors, coming to them and stating, hey, I was actually in your shoes. We were invested passively on this deal. Here are the questions that I had, or here are the things that we went through. Here's the experience that I've had. Here's what I learned going through that process. That's going to be much easier to do if you have that experience. So a lot of folks try to start off as a general partner. Hey, I want to raise some capital for a deal, or I want to underwrite. And you can do that. I'm not saying you can't do it. Obviously, you can't do it, but it's going to be the path of least resistance is starting off as a limited partner or passive investor in a deal, and then transitioning into that space.
Another thing that I want to hit on is before we started recording, we were talking about systems and processes and what we got in check as we go through our systems and processes and seeing how everything lines up. And there's a structure and a way that everything flows, and you got to learn that. And it might take a couple deals if you really don't have those checks and balances in place. So we talked about that before we recorded, and it really, there's ways to test against it. But I would say the best way to test against it is invest passively, find out how they are communicating and going through the process. Because when you're investing passively, you got direct access to the syndicator now. You can ask them questions. Hey, how come this looks like this? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? What was your thought process here and stuff like that? You can ask those questions and you're going to get those answers. So that's the fastest way to learn, is because I tell people this, the fastest way to learn is invest your capital, because now you're watching that capital. You're going to learn so fast because you're watching that money. So you're going to watch and you're going to ask the questions that you want the answers to. And it's probably like, I don't know, people pay for programs. That's the best program to pay for, because now you're getting paid to learn.
Exactly. And it's real, and it's real, it's live. And you better believe you can come up with some good questions when it's your real money and you're not just sitting there reading a book or looking at a course. So agree completely. John, let's transition to our bullseye round. You ready?
Let's do it.
What is the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year?
This is easy. The Third Door. It's Alex Benayan. It's not even I wouldn't classify it as a real estate book. It's more like a book to help you figure things out, right? So I give this to all my cousins that graduate. I give this as gifts. It's about a process of when you want to do something. First is that we'll equate everything to a club. When you're going to go to a club and just act like the club is the thing that you want to do, there's 3 ways in. There's the regular admission line. You're standing in a line that's wrapped around the corner, and you might be outside in the cold. It might be hot, cold, or whatever, but you're waiting in that line to get in the club. Then there's the VIP, the guy that pulls up in the nice car, pulls out, and walks right into the club. Then there's the back door. You're climbing through the window. You're going through the kitchen, and then you walk through the back door. And now you're in the club. How do you figure out to get through the back door, the third door, the one that I just explained? And that book just really just paints a great picture of how Alex Benayan got to where he got to by writing that book. So that's my favorite book, because it trains me to use my brain into how do I think about going to this? If everybody's doing this, how would I get into that by doing this? So that's why I love that book.
All right. Sorry. Third Door. We'll have to check that out. I think the other question is, how do you do it without cutting your knees in the process?
Yeah, make sure you're not breaking the glass.
Not getting arrested. But yeah. All right. Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Man, I'm the marketing we're doing right now on social media. We're LinkedIn. We're heavy on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Yeah. So we're using those. We use MailChimp for our newsletters and stuff too.
What is a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
Working out and meditating. I've slacked on the meditating, but I got to get back on it because I noticed that when my thoughts are slower, I make better decisions. When I lose sight of meditating for a little bit, thoughts are going and going and going. So I got to slow down.
What do you do to meditate? I mean, a lot of folks say meditation. I know some folks struggle with like how to actually meditate. It seems silly, but I know a lot of people struggle with actually the meditation process. Is there a process or a chant that you say, or what's your actual meditation process?
My process is literally breathing. I try to focus on my breathing when I'm meditating because that helps me control my heart rate. I'm trying to control my heart rate and make sure it's at a nice, steady, calm pace where when my heart rate goes down, then I know I'm pretty relaxed. So it's all about staying in that calm, relaxed state as long as possible, and breathing works for me. It might be different from everybody else, but everything that I've read, that breathing really helps control that.
All right, what's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Oh man, basically communication with tenants going in on that first deal. So communicating with tenants is huge. Just like communicating with your passive investors, your tenants are basically your first priority, and then it's your passive investors. So I'm glad that wasn't a syndicated deal because of basically the capital calls, but communication is key. And that's to tenants, passive investors, your active investors in a JV. All forms of communication is key. If you don't have that, then you don't really have anything. You're gonna have failure. So
what advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about the real world?
Try to do what you want to do as soon as possible. And I mean that, like, if you're in school and you can juggle interning or working for someone or just finding someone that emulating what you want to do and channeling and trying to work with them or trying to emulate them, do it immediately. The sooner you could do it, the faster, the better for you. So, yeah.
What advice should they ignore?
Don't just do one thing. Like I said, try to do exactly what you're doing while completing what you're doing. So if you're going to stay in school, and I'm an advocate for school, if you're going to stay in school, try to do what you can immediately. Don't just focus on your books. Unless you are a one-track mind, then you got to do what you got to do to graduate.
What are you curious about right now?
I'm always curious about how people structure their deals. So I'm a savage for deal structure and how you model in your structures in your deals as well. So that's what I'm always curious about, and I'm always eager in learning about it. To give you an idea, when I was in Dallas for a conference, I ran into Reed Goosens and I was picking his brain about his structure. And so everybody that's a level higher than me or more, I'm literally trying to ask them how they are modeling things and why they are modeling the way they are. So it was a great conversation.
Absolutely. Reed's a good friend and a friend of the podcast as well. So good to get some advice from him. All right. So you're in the Boston area. You got to give me the best place to grab a bite in the area.
So I'm going to tell you from my hometown, from Brockton, Massachusetts. And for breakfast, me and my wife, we love Deeg's Diner, and then we love JJ's Cafe. So if you're in Brockton area and if you're a boxing fan like me and coming to see the Rocky Marciano the statue, go there for breakfast. And for dinner, whether we are we love bar style pizza. So we go to Cape Cod Cafe. And if we're really going out nice for a nice dinner, we're going to Solera. So that's in my wife's hometown next door. So I believe I said it right, but it's a nice restaurant. It's awesome.
Nice.
Sorry, I gave you 4. I gave you 4. Sorry.
4 is good. No, it's good to see see the options. So we were in Boston obviously a few months ago, where you and I kind of got a chance to catch up, and would have been good to check out one of those places. So we'll make sure you put it on our list for the future. So
let's do it.
Sure. Good stuff, man. Well, listen, you gave a lot of great information for our listeners right now who want to check out the Passive Investor Show or want to get in touch with you. What's the best way to connect?
You can reach out to me at passiveinvestorshow.com. That's the website. That's the way you can find it for all the platforms. But if you want to reach out to me, it's John at johnfortes.com.
All right, John, listen, lots of great information. I really appreciate you sharing so much of the lessons learned on that 62-unit deal that did not go as according to plan, but I know you guys are working through it, powering through it, and we'll get that thing back on the right track very shortly here. Love kind of the contrast of the 41-unit that's performing as expected, and know that you got some other deals in the works right now. Continue to grow the portfolio and growing your connections. So thank you for sharing all that. And then also talking to us about your podcast, why you launched it, some of the things you've learned in doing the podcast, and kind of your focus on the quick hitters, the quick hitting information, doing it in note format versus a blog post, and just really trying to be conscientious of the time that people have and how do you get them the information in a way where it's easily digestible so they can get what they need and continue to move on with their life. So thank you again for coming on the show, man, and sharing all this great information.
Thank you, man. We talk as much as we can with us being so busy, but I do text you and you text back, and I love the interaction we have, man. I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. Take care, John.
Have a good one, man. God bless.